Hello and a very, very warm welcome. We are very happy to be hosting one of the first sessions in the D&C Days, and we're very grateful that you have chosen to spend some of your time with us today on the very important topic of how to channel climate finance and decision-making power to the local level where it's needed. My name is Margaret Arnold. I'll be your moderator for this session. Together, we're going to explore how countries are driving locally led climate action at scale by devolving climate finance to the local level and decision-making power. Why is this so important? We know that the global gap for climate finance continues to widen, with financing needs outstripping funds mobilized by at least 7-1. We know that very little of this money is reaching local communities on the front lines, and we know that the ratio of investment in terms of mitigation to adaptation is at least 10-1. So we need more, particularly adaptation funds on the ground to put communities that are already feeling the impacts. Much of the financing to address climate change is raised from domestic sources, and we need national scale systems that can attract, retain, and effectively utilize climate finance in a way that recognizes local capacities and traditional knowledge and responds to local felt priorities. So these national platforms or systems for locally led adaptation and climate action and devolved climate finance can help achieve a number of goals, including scale, as I keep mentioning, which is crucial. We need to reach people on the ground at the scale necessary to address the climate crisis because we are in an urgent crisis. We can think about sustainability, avoiding a projectized approach that can be fragmented depending on funding cycles and things. Make it sustainable by building into existing government mechanisms and strengthening a national scale system for climate finance and action. It can help build trust and partnerships between citizens, civil society groups, local and national governments. It can help with leveraging. As you'll hear from some of the speakers, these can serve as a platform to crowd in other sources of climate finance. And finally, it can help build the vertical connections, right? We need the horizontal spread to reach everyone, but we also need to connect the local to the national to inform nationally determined contributions, long-term strategies, and other national climate adaptation plans and climate commitments and policies so that they're informed by what's happening on the ground. So in this session, we're very fortunate to be hearing from three experiences which center and promote local leadership in the management of climate finance. So we will hear from Peter Odengo, a senior policy advisor from the National Treasury of Kenya and the coordinator of the Financing Locally Led Climate Action Program, or FLOCA, as we call it for short. We'll also hear from Scovia Akot, the Life AR national focal point from the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda. And we'll also hear from Justine Audren, a local regional specialist for Eastern and Southern Africa from the UN Capital Development Fund, about the UNCDF experience with the locale facility. So we're going to explore how these platforms were set up and operationalized, and hear their insights and hear from you about scaling these approaches in other contexts. So again, welcome, and we're going to get started. Thanks to all the speakers for joining us. Peter, let me start with you. Can you give us a quick overview of the FLOCA system, how it developed and evolved, how it builds capacity at the local level, and also how it has helped to attract other sources of climate finance? Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Let me also recognize my colleagues from different parts of the world listening here today. Our FLOCA program was designed as a result of a felt need because Kenya, as early as 2006, had already is starting to come up with policies, legislative frameworks, strategies, which was supposed now to guide the country in how to respond to climate change. Indeed, these were the main one was informed by the the Stockholm Environment Study in 2009, which indicated that Kenya will lose between 2 to 3%, between 3 to 4% of our GDP if, as a result of climate change, impact of climate change. And because of this, the government took it very seriously because the Kenyan economy is driven by nature-based sectors. Now, as I mentioned, a number of things had been going on from different aspects of the intervention, mitigation, adaptation, capacity building, etc. But there was a felt need gap that the local people were not being involved. Climate change became an elitist terminology and high level discourse and discussion within the cities and hotels. But now the people themselves who are feeling the impact of prolonged drought, intense floods, diseases, failed crops, death of livestock, started coming up to say that they are not part of the process. And it is upon this background that in 2019, 2020, we, together with our partners, World Bank, the Kenya government, and the partners, decided to conduct a need assessment. Now, what is this need? What is this gap? How do we communicate, and how the people could be involved to respond to the challenges which affect them? So we decided to cover all 47 subnationals and go into 1,440 watts because that design has never been touched before. Generally, there has been landscapes have been littered with pilots, small areas waiting for long to bring in the people. So it is as a result that climate change will not wait one side be solving its problems, and it is not going to wait for somebody to come from somewhere else to articulate the local climate problem. Thirdly, adaptation was the priority of the people, the priority of the country was adaptation. It was to build the local resilience and infrastructure. Now, this compelled the government and us at the National Treasury to come up with this new model. It is on that we said, why can't we now involve the people in the front line? They know the problems, they know the terrain, and we compare them. We have a landscape approach. As a result of this, we designed the program covering the entire country. And then as a result of this, coupled with good policies, legislative framework, and enhanced capacity and involvement of the citizen, now the development partners led by the World Bank came in handy to mobilize additional partners, Daneda, Sweden, Netherlands, Norway, all these people to come together, and the government now. So, one, we were trying to respond to the Paris Agreement, Article 9 and Article 9, transparency, Article 7, and provision of finance in scale, predictability, and availability. So we had to come up with a blended system of the finance. And in the first phase, we managed to mobilize $294 million US. These $294 million dollars, first of all, it was the first ever such a fund from development partners, development banks, government itself, and the local people, local subnational unilaterally agreed to put their resources together to respond to climate change. Then later, the local subnationals in the second year of the program, where we have two types of grants. County Climate Institutional Support Grant, that is an institutional building where there are gaps. The second one is Climate Resilient Investment Grant. So from the bigger money from the global perspective, it is scaled down, is brought in with a special purpose fund at the National Treasury. Then this money is now taken to the local level. And within the local level, now the people awareness was created for the people now to participate in decision and in prioritizing their own problems and adaptive problems under what we call participatory risk assessment. Once they mapped the risk, then they map the money, and then now the resources are now being allocated under what we call P4R. Once that one is done at the village, ward, subnational, then it is coming up to the PIU where we now frame them, get the concept based on the people's decision, allocate this. And the program is financing water, climate smart agriculture, restoration of degraded landscapes, then clean renewable energy and emerging issues, including disaster risk. Then it brings in all the whole government approach, ministries, special agencies, civil society organizations, the private sector to come together to put in. So within this one, we have learned one, yes, the local people know their own problem. Two, they have their own, they have skills to complement global and national discourse. And then they are also, they are very happy to have their own ownership because they say this is our own project. And as such, we have seen a very great transformativeness in addressing adaptation. And finally, we have the local leaders approved that adaptation has got a business component. Now we are moving into Craig 3, of which 2,240 projects. We have now selected about 100 projects, which are bankable, soundable, which is adaptation, and ready for uptake pipeline by the private sector. So we have a plan, we have a strategy, we have the people, and all the populations are covered, both urban and rural. So we hope we will be able to say this landscape approach under the principle no one should be left behind and no one should pull anybody behind. Thank you very much, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that quick overview. I think it's fantastic that you've shown, and I think it's also important to note that there were some pilots from on county climate change funds ahead of building that also built on that also FLOCA was built upon, and that you're leveraging and crowding in other partners. Can you say a little bit more about how the institutional grants work and how they are building local capacity to engage communities in the dialogue around climate change and identify priorities?
Perfect. As you rightly mentioned, that from 2010, Kenya has been piloting adaptation principle, locally led adaptation principles, with about 5 county subnationals here. Now, based on these good results from these 5 out of 47, now the team now had a very good plethora of the gaps, lack of awareness, lack of institutional support, lack of the coordination framework at the lower level. It is upon this background of the experiences that we got from those 5 that we had learned the missing legislative framework and the coordination framework. So it is on that the bigger program was designed to have 2 types of grant: the county climate change institutional support grant and the investment grant. And within the institutional support grant, as you mentioned, generally governments don't go down to the households in many cases or to the lowest level. So this grant was now supposed to help the local people at the ward level to come to establish ward planning committees, that is now to plan all the adaptation and the principle. Then ward project management committee to see the management of the program. Then to have the steering committee from the ward level, which is built from the household. As a result of that, now the money, which was $100,000 per year for 3 years, was now to create this missing link from the national one. And then after that, now the investment now come in because counties had supposed to come up with their own specific legislative framework, which is aligned and mainstreamed by the national one. And the national one is mainstreamed by the international one, like Paris Agreement. So now we were scaling down into that. And then the institutional support was now going forward, is now to establish, to support the local level to come up with 1, village determined contribution; 2, ward determined contribution; 3, subnational determined contribution; 4, now national determined contribution, which is now the county and the national. Now it is on this one now which is going to put our NDC review for the future revision of the NDC. So the NDCs and the work plans which are coming out is as a result by the people and not by the workshops. So, Margaret, I think this is the innovation here. This is the paradigm shifting, that now everything starts from the local level, including the NDC, as opposed to the Paris NDC, where everybody sit in an hotel, assume, and come up. Over to you.
Thank you, Peter. I think you're demonstrating well how you're building from the local level all the way up to the national level in terms of informing the priorities and really building on Kenya's decentralization process generally to build this into the system. So thanks for that. We'll come back to you in a bit. Scovia, let me hear from you from your Uganda experience and Life AR. Can you talk a bit about that experience and how you've been able to ensure a whole of society approach within Life AR?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Peter, for setting the scene and stage for us. I want to start with briefly talking about Life AR. Life AR is an LDC initiative that focuses on strengthening capacities for country governments, one, to mobilize financing, and secondly, also to manage that financing, but also to build in country institutions along the path, not only to deliver financing to communities, but also to be able to contribute to the resource pool of financing overall. Now, for Life AR in Uganda, we opted for the devolved climate financing as a mechanism to deliver support for adaptation to communities. And within the devolved climate financing, we were looking at one, having the source of financing or the financing itself, what we're calling the fund, and committing the total sum of funding mobilized to communities. And we're committing 70% of that financing mobilized to communities. But also we are looking at the aspect of participatory planning, that is planning together with the local governments and with the communities. And the other aspect is on climate information and ensuring that whatever plans that are developed are not just development plans, but are hinged rather on risks that are identified within the communities, but also ensuring that they speak directly to the long term, not just short term climate needs. And then lastly, on the aspect of monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Now, I'll speak on how that translates in terms of the whole of society. One, at the national level, strategically, we are working with other ministries, departments, and agencies in terms of management of the Life AR program. That is at the steering committee or strategic level, oversight of the program. And that comes with benefits. It comes with benefit in terms of one, optimizing resources that exist across the governments, both technical expertise, but also resources in terms of supporting the program and not putting a huge burden of management to the program resources. And that has come in very handy with institutions committing to host events, supplementing a few administrative costs for the program, but also having the alignment of the Life AR to the national priorities. We have the Ministry of Finance, we have the Ministry of Local Government, the Ministry of Gender. As examples here, we also have civil society, academia, working together with us at the Ministry of Water and Environment to deliver this program to the communities. But also, technically, we have expertise. We are leveraging on the expertise from these institutions, from the non-state actors to guide the delivery of the program, right from the design of the devolved climate finance mechanism. Now, and how do we translate that support to the subnational level? We also work with the district local governments using their existing structures to deliver support to the communities. And we've used the national institutions, one, to train or to build capacities of the district local governments to understand the program, but also broadly around the management of climate financing, around the understanding of climate risks, but also around the understanding of participatory engagement and how we're supposed to approach the communities in a way that presents communities as partners and not just beneficiaries or victims of climate change. And so we've successfully done that. But I want to just speak to how jointly with the districts and the national governments, we've been able to work with community structures established within the frameworks of the National Climate Change Act, what we're calling the parish climate change committees. And this is a committee that has been created by the communities, transparently, membership elected by the communities, transparently, not dependent on your capacity to read and write, but rather on your integrity as determined by the communities. And we link this structure directly to the parish leadership in the districts. So ensuring that this is not an isolated structure, but rather a structure that sits within the framework of the districts. For example, at the parish level in Uganda, the lowest level in Uganda here, we have these committees, and the secretary to this committee is the parish chief. And the parish chief is recognized in the government structure. And they get support directly from the sub-county technical planning committee that is also overseen by the district technical planning committee. And we've aligned and empowered the district and the sub-county planning committees as trainers of trainers. And they are there to offer day-to-day support to the community leadership who are representing directly the community in the district structures. So we've seen tremendous benefits with this. One is that we are placing the communities through the PCCs to voice out their needs directly, align and translate the community needs to the district and national priorities. And right now, with the priorities that have been identified by the communities, they are now translating these into what we are calling the district development plans. They're in the planning cycle. And we're hoping that some of the priorities that came from consultations with the communities, but also we did what we call a participatory climate risk and vulnerability assessment, that the communities used now to prioritize their needs, but also solutions to their climate change challenges. So we are hoping that will be translated into their district climate change plans, but also make its way to the National Climate Change Action Plan, which is the NDC. So that is one opportunity. But what we've seen also with this method of work is that we have sustainable support to the communities. Rather than having isolated structures, we have sustainable support to the communities right at the lowest level. We have the parish supporting the communities. We have the sub-counties supporting the community. So this is sustainable, but it has also built ownership. And also for the first time, the communities are appreciating that we're putting them at the forefront of working with the districts and building a partnership rather than seeing them as beneficiaries or as victims. So the communities have really appreciated the approach. And then it also comes with the aspects of political leadership in the districts. You cannot do away with this. You need strategic leadership where the interventions are being implemented. We have the districts acting as champions to the program. And we also put them together with the communities to decide on how the project or the programs are supposed to run. And this has also prevented the aspects of elite capture in many of these communities. We have examples. When the communities were selecting their interventions, some of the district officials confessed that, well, some of them wanted these interventions in their parishes, but because the community right from the start were empowered through the PCCs and knew the criteria for selection of the investments, they knew the checklist, what was supposed to be done for an investment to qualify to be a community good. So they protected, and the district leadership itself appreciated the approach right from the start. And for us, we count that as success to us because we are seeing that we are using the life AR approach to demonstrate that we can work with communities. We can work with whole of government. We can work with civil society. We can work with partners. I'll give another example. We have the Makerere University, for example. We have the academia that is supporting us in technically supporting us to ensure that we are we are running as per the guidelines of the DCF. So in other cases, we would be hiring international consultants. We would be relying on maybe external support in general overall. But what we're having happening at the moment, we have national capacity being built across the board at the local government level, but also at the district level. And that is an example of how whole of society can progressively build a system that is going to progressively enable the country to operate beyond external support. And we appreciate that modality at the moment. So I want to also talk directly to the aspects of mass consultations. When the communities are involved from the planning level, and that is what we've experienced and seen, and you're very intentional on inclusivity, it comes with a lot of benefits. We employed what we call the participatory planning toolkit, what we call the Pamoja toolkit, in terms of mass consultations, in terms of priorities and needs for the communities. And we've seen that the gender issues are coming out very strongly in the projects that have been put forward by the communities, because each of the categories, the women, the youth, were able to articulate their challenges, and jointly they agreed on solutions that could meet the needs of the different categories. And this has been appreciated. But also that comes because we had the support of the district to mobilize. We had the support of the local leadership to mobilize the communities and to know what is there for them from the Life AR program. And then lastly, on transparency and accountability. Because we were able to work with the districts and with the local government, the Ministry of Local Government, and also with the Ministry of Finance, the National Planning Authority. For the first time ever, we were able to have the communities represented in the procurement sittings, or the procurement committees of the district. And so they were able to oversee the process of onboarding or recruiting the service providers that were going to deliver the services or the projects that they asked for. And that has been ticked from the community perspective as the highest degree of transparency for the program. And it has built trust that the program is here for the people and not for the developers of the program. And they feel they have the confidence in their leadership. We get testimonies through the PCCs, we get testimonies through the district structures that this is the modality that they hope other programs will adopt in terms of delivering support to the communities. So I'll keep it at that and wait for any questions if any.
Great.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Scovia, and for also emphasizing the importance of inclusion, having an inclusive approach, getting everyone's voices heard, and showing how this, just as in the case of Kenya, these can be built into existing systems in terms of building these institutions so that this is how they do business now, right? Inclusive and participatory. There's questions, and Peter, I don't know if you can see the chat on your phone around wanting more details around the participatory approach and how I think it's important to note, I can't remember if you mentioned that these are performance-based grants to the county governments, and how those work, because there are requirements to access the funds, and also and they're used really to incentivize these changes. So I think that's an important point to make. I don't know, Peter, if you can respond to some of the specific questions you have in the chat, and there may be some for Scovia. But let me, at this point, I think it's a good point to bring in Justine, because we're talking about sort of, the lessons around how these work. So Justine, thanks for joining us again. From a locale perspective, can you talk us a little bit through what, from the experience you have with locale, what are the conditions and key elements for scaling these system ups? And what are the lessons learned and good practices in the region? Thanks, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Margaret. And thanks for Peter and Scovia for the great presentations as well. So local is also a country-owned mechanism. It was designed by the United Nations Capital Development Fund, in fact, as early as 2011, and has become a global facility implemented worldwide since 2014. So we have this experience of scaling up globally and across countries. Like FLOCA, like LifeAR, the objective is really to channel climate finance to community through decentralized systems. So since 2014, we've grown from originally being in 3 countries and supporting 3 country programs in Bhutan, Bangladesh, Nepal, to now, in fact, a multi-country facility covering across 23 countries. Those 23 countries across the world and across regions of the world, targeting mostly LDCs. They are all operational with grants, meaning that in each of these countries, grants are channeled through fiscal decentralization systems. So in the region in Africa, more specifically, we've steadily increased the number of participating local governments by scaling up both at country level, and that's one of the process that I'll explain a little bit, and also at regional level, as I said, across countries. So we've grown from 117 local governments in 23 to now 117, 25, adding also more countries over the same period. 5 new countries were added to the mechanism. So maybe I highlight some of the key elements or key aspects and also some good practices in how we've been able to scale up at country level and regionally. I think, and Scovia and Peter really touched on these aspects greatly, showing the case of Uganda and Kenya, how important it is to strengthen national systems. And this is really, we consider that really as a precondition to scaling up. There's no way we can start scaling up, adding more local government, adding more countries, if the precondition, if the systems for channeling climate finance, for channeling these funds are not in place and supported. We, for local, because we work really through fiscal decentralization systems, this in fact can vary greatly from one country to another, depending on the decentralization framework. So for instance, in Ghana, the grants, we channel them as a top-up of existing grants for climate resilience. In Uganda, Mozambique, for instance, we act as a window of existing fiscal framework for channeling grants. In other countries in the region as well, like Lesotho, Tanzania, we mainstream those grants into existing programs. So there's we also see here the complexity and the challenge when we want to scale up, that there's, of course, a variety of situation. And that's also why, to some extent, for local, we worked on harmonizing and bringing standards. So the local now provides the baseline and the methodology for an ISO standards for locally led adaptation through local governments and fiscal decentralization. And this is also a key element that I think is also relevant to the FLOCA and LifeAR, that this is also because we set up the system and those standards, this allows for attracting more and additional funding. Because we prove by testing, we make the case that those grants can be used effectively and efficiently, and it is a condition to attract more funding. Along the way, an important point also to highlight regarding capacity building. Likewise, local, we use performance-based grants. This is key. Also, not only to incentivize local government to do better, but also for us, development partners, national entities, to actually know where the gaps in terms of capacities are, and to test and to assess them and analyze them year by year and through the systems. So we work closely, UNCDF through with local, with national entities, also to make sure that national entity can ensure year by year assessing those capacity and those performance can also provide the necessary support to local government. So we work mostly with local government, ministries of local government, but also, and very important, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Gender, different line ministries that can contribute to filling those capacity gap for local governments and their communities. And lastly, I want to highlight here one more specific element that feed into this scale up is also and also is maybe specific also to local and the way it is built in phases. The role of peer-to-peer learning. I think it's true of all the experiences that we've heard that and specifically for local. So we would start scaling up gradually at country level. So we would start with a design phase, moving towards a pilot phase. And during this pilot phase, that's when we engage with pilot local governments that would pilot and test the mechanism. And that's only when we've tested that we can move on or graduate to a second phase to consolidate some of the key features that have worked. This is very important also because we see how it takes time to actually align with national system and fiscal decentralization, and also to set up the condition for these systems to work and to be in place to channel more and attract more. So just to conclude, this experience from local, what is important is we've really created a community of practice, whether it's at global level, in fact, through the global board, but also, and maybe more importantly, at national level. And that's why we've heard also those different perspectives, a community of practice involving also different partners, including development partners, to exchange knowledge and for local government to exchange on their practices. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justine, for giving us some of the learnings from that. I wanted to do another round of questions, and there's some great questions coming up in the chat around what are the challenges working with communities and how you balance the short-term needs of communities with the longer-term adaptation needs. These are all fantastic questions, and I wish we had another at least 2 hours to discuss, but unfortunately the time for us has run out so quickly. So what I'm going to do is ask if any of the speakers can respond directly in the chat to some of the questions that were raised. And also, and use the D&C Days, platform to also engage more with the speakers and with other colleagues online. But for now, I'm going to I'm going to say thank you so much to everyone for joining and to all our wonderful speakers. And I'm going to hand over to Tracy Kambuja, who's going to wrap up for us. Tracy, over to you.
I hope that some of you were able to engage with the questions in the Mentimeter. There was a question about country platform for climate finance and what it needs to achieve. So some of the issues that came out, one of them was tailored finance, long-term action, which is also coming out of the conversations, flexible implementation, community-driven results, just transition, possibly that didn't come up, but important for middle-income countries and others. Local access, which we've also talked about, and support for the vulnerable. I also saw questions in the chat on how we are including some of the vulnerable countries like indigenous communities and others. And there was also a question on the key elements of the platform. Some of the issues that came out, it needs to be locally grounded, demand-driven, long-term as well, consultative. There has been a lot of conversation on country platforms being demand-led, efficiency, just the issue of equity is a big one because largely focuses on middle income now with LDCs starting to come in. It needs to be sustainable and aligned to national priorities. So those are some of the issues that came up. My role was to summarize and give two key messages, two, three possibly. So it was great hearing from the three initiatives, which are very similar, if you agree with me. Very similar approaches between FLOCA, local, and LifeAR. But for me, the three things that came up, one of the themes for D&C Days is locally led adaptation, it's climate finance and innovation. Some of the cross-cutting things that I had that were really strong linked to LLA, especially principle one of locally led adaptation, devolving decision-making to the lowest level is one of the strong messaging that came across the three initiatives. All the initiatives are really trying to bring in local communities into risk assessments, into deciding the investments, into linking them with districts and national in terms of policy, investments, and access to finance, which remains really important as one of the principles. Then the other approach as well in terms of devolving is the decentralization. Both initiatives are really strengthening decentralization. We know many governments have been using decentralization for a long time, but as Justin says, it's different for different countries. Some are strong, some are not, based on the support they have for different structures. So, which takes us to principle 4 of LLA, investing in local capabilities, which is really important. I work for LifeAir. The LDC group is really keen on this, strengthening systems and capabilities of LDCs, because one of the barriers to accessing finance is because LDCs have no capacity. That's a general term that is used without assessing which capacities, how do we support LDCs to be able to do that. FLOCA is doing the same. Local is also focusing on that. So the systems and capabilities is one of those that is really important. So LLA Principle 4, I think we need to take that forward. The learning has come across communities of practice. LifeAir, Local are all doing communities of practice, some at districts, some at global level, which is important. Justin also mentioned an important point on testing what is working and what is not working. We are also doing a lot of that in LifeAR through delivery mechanisms that work. How do you refine them? Do they work for the specific countries? That is important. And the last one is the collaborative action and investment, the 8th principle, which I had also coming across all the three. Partnerships are really important. Sometimes when we talk about partnership, we think of big institutions, but it could be communities with local governments or local governments and national ministries, which links into the whole of society approach, which Scovia was talking about. If institutions are not able to come together, to work together, to bring resources and skills and expertise together, then it becomes really difficult to achieve whatever we're trying to do. And that also, of course, includes funders. LifeAir is a partnership initiative with the LDCs, international community, academia, civil society. I think we need to do that. But the big question as I conclude is, how do you bring these initiatives together, especially if they're working in the same country, dealing with the same ministries? How do you manage that complexity? One of the things I would reflect on is that Local talked of 23 countries. We are talking of 10 countries, some of them overlapping, but then we have 45 LDCs that are really struggling with access to finance. But even when we look at the local governments, Uganda has like 135 local governments. I think between Local and LifeAir, they've not even tackled half of the local governments. So the need is big, but how do we collaborate? How do we work together to make sure that we are learning from these initiatives? We are not duplicating in the same locations so that we're able to scale out and enable countries to really test and scale out these mechanisms in a way that is not duplicating. So I think that's one of the key messaging, that we need to continue reflecting between the three of us. And I hope the conversation will not end here between Local, FLOC, and LFAR. Possibly we need to talk more on how we can collaborate and scale out what we are doing. Thank you very much. So I'll hand it over back to you, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Really great summary and great words to end on about how we can both can at the same time meet partners and governments where they are, but really, because this is urgent, we do need to get to scale, and keeping all the LLA principles in mind, really get this scaled up. I'll just, to your last question, I'll just give one quick example as a response. In Tanzania, there's a scaling up locally led climate action program that the World Bank is supporting, that's modeled on the FLOCO model. Local is also there, operating in several districts. So we have agreed with them and government that we won't overlap in those districts, but we'll work together and learn together. So we do need that coordination because we do need to get to scale. Absolutely, the time for like pilots are wonderful, but I feel like the time for pilots is over. We need to, as you say, get to all the LDCs. So thank you again for all our wonderful speakers. Thank you again to all of you online for joining us. And we hope that this is just the beginning of the conversation and to continue to engage with you. Thank you so much.